Good morning. It is Mike. Yeah, lights on, but nothing's working. Good morning. Is it working? No? I thought it was working. Sounds like it is.
I can hear the tapping.
Nothing again. Good morning. It is May 31st, 2022. We're here in the Commissioners' Boardroom for the meeting. We have a full slate of commissioners. We have the county administrator and the clerk of the board. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order, and if you'd please rise and join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, with that, the first order on the agenda is the approval of minutes for May 3rd and May 10th. Is there any additions, corrections? Okay. Next, we'll move down to office business. May 3rd and May 10th. And we'll move down to the office business. I believe we have 2 vouchers.
Move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $318,362.76 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in a total amount of $1,014,980.22 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed by has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Moves us down to the consent agenda. I believe there's 6 items on the consent agenda.
Move for approval of the consent agenda items 1 through 6.
Second. Discussion.
There's been a motion and a second for the 6 items on the consent agenda with discussion. Go ahead, Commissioner Peck.
Just an observation. I normally don't support putting payroll issues on the consent agenda, especially in the midst of all the payroll discussions that we're having, but I want to point out that I think this one is entirely appropriate when you have someone with the years of experience that this candidate has, that it's a tool we have and we should use. Just don't normally do them on the consent. Thanks.
Okay. There's been a motion and a second for the 6 items on the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. With that, we'll move down to the Commissioner Administrator updates. So, Mr. Johnson, would you please lead us off?
Yes, sir. Good morning. In the last week, I've had a number of meetings that I participated in, continuing discussions with the regional partners on the Juvenile Justice Center. The planning for that facility is ongoing, and I participated with them that last week. Also listened in on the 1152 committee meeting. That committee has been formed to develop the additions to the Bi-County Health District Board that is taking place over the next few weeks and months. Participated in a city manager, county administrator meeting last week to talk about just regional issues that are going on. One of which I've been participating in is the BIPIN upgrade. That's the Bi-County Police Information Network that's undergoing a major rewrite of that system. It ties into the work that we're doing at Benton County Emergency Services and our consolidated dispatch center. And then also participated in a call with some folks from the White House regarding federal programs for dealing with the Ukrainian refugees that may be coming into this country, and kind of the vetting process that they have to go through to get approval to come to the United States. So those are the major things that worked on
Thank you.
this week.
Commissioner Peck?
Met with Mr. Johnson and HR, as I think the other commissioners did, to, excuse me, talk about some of the pending personnel issues. Was one of the participants in the 1152 meeting that Mr. Johnson just spoke to, which is expanding the Board of Health consistent with the state statute, which the bill was numbered 1152. That's where the name comes from. Friday met with the COPA organization, which is the Colima, Mexico, Pasco activity, working to create a sister city arrangement between the city of Pasco and Colima. I bring it up here today because there is a request pending that'll, I guess it's not pending yet, it'll be coming to the county soon, but much like the dinner under the dome that we did for the Historical Society, there's going to be a request to hold a similar reception event in the rotunda. The governess, the new governor for the state of Colima, will be here in September, and Washington State governor will be invited. And I think for legislative activities at that level, it's probably appropriate use of the rotunda, but a formal request will be coming. Just wanted to give you a heads up today. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen?
Pasco Chamber Board of Directors meeting, July 16th will be their Crawfish Festival at Osprey Point. The Sagebrush Scramble is going to be June 17th at Sun Willows. Also had a tri-deck meeting, and also attended the Columbia River County Caucus meeting in Ephrata. We had a report there from the Governor's Office on the Salmon Recovery Strategy update, and Tom Teeb of the Office of the Columbia River Department of Ecology spoke on water issues. And that is what I have this week.
Well, I'm glad you were able to attend the Columbia River Caucus meeting, because I had a conflict with the Port of Pasco meeting, so I attended that. Interesting facts there going on with the Port of Pasco and what's going on with these TIF. Pasco's got a TIF going to happen out here where the Costco's planning on being built, which is going to overwhelm the TIF that Port of Pasco has over there with what's going on with the old highway. Also, I went out and viewed the two bridges that were worked on Glade Road, and I got to tell Mr. Erdman, good job. Nice job on the approaches to both of those bridges, and on the one further north, you put down some iron plating and put some, shored up that bridge, so good job on that. So with that, we'll move down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment? Anybody on the phone, Keith?
Don't have anybody on the phone, I don't believe. No.
Anybody for public comment?
Good morning, Commissioners. Question that I wondered if we could get, probably for Mr. Johnson actually, is a while back asked the question about bridges across the river. I think it was Tridec that was here. And we were going to ask them formally to look into what that process would take. Wondered where we're at with that process. I've had several conversations with the State Department of Transportation and with others regarding transportation, and they hadn't heard of it, and just wondered if we could get an update on it. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Respond to that.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Point of order has been called for. Commissioner Peck.
As much as I appreciate and enjoy public comment, I would recommend going forward that, consistent with Robert's rules in virtually every other county, public comment is for the public to make observations, comments on the board's activities, and if we're going to have a Q&A or a discussion, that we ought to take those things and put them on the agenda for the following week so that other members of the public who are interested in this topic can come and participate. When we do it this way, we get into this cycle of doing updates on projects on an ad hoc basis, and people interested in the subject never see it on the agenda and never get to come in and participate. So while I'm certainly not opposed to a brief update, if there's a recurring issue on this, I think we ought to put it on the agenda and keep public comment to public comment as opposed to ad hoc agenda items. Thank you.
Public comment was asked of a question. Point of order was asked. I will ask Mr. Johnson to please answer the question.
Okay. We have not proffered a official request for review of that project. That is one of a number of different projects that's being discussed. The major transportation planning issues for the region are done through the Council of Governments and our own county transportation plan. That does not preclude us from that particular project is not on our current 6-year transportation plan, but that does not preclude us from raising that issue to state DOT or other regional partners to participate. So I would defer to Craig a little bit on the detailed process by which that would occur. It would be delegated to his office anyway, but I would say in short answer to the question is that is certainly an item that is of regional interest. As I said, it's one of several, and we will be continuing to foster that discussion amongst our regional partners.
Okay, anybody else for public comment?
So I thought, I didn't put it on the agenda, but I wanted to give the commissioners a little bit of an update. The change of value notices for all property in Franklin County, or a vast majority, some nearly 30,000 parcels, went out last Friday. Those will be beginning to be received by our taxpayers, landowners today. These are certainly prices that are reflective of what the market did last year, not what the market is doing currently. We assess those values based on last year's market up to January 1st. So what people are going to be seeing on those change of value notices are reflective of last year's move in the market. We follow that market. We don't set the market. So certainly if you get phone calls from people that are concerned, please have them call our office. Our website has been updated. They can get in and look at a bunch of information on their areas, their districts. They can look at sales comparisons in there. We've updated all of that data as of Friday evening, so they can do that. I just wanted to give you commissioners an update on that. We certainly, like everything else, are seeing values going up. So that's not reflective. The taxes are going up, but the values are going up. We'll have to see what the budgets, of course, at the end of the year from all the taxing entities are for the setting of the levy rate. So just wanted to give you an update on that.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Nobody on the phone, Keith?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll move down to the next item on the agenda, which is the Public Works for the vacation of a portion of Cottonwood Drive. And at this time, on this public hearing, I will open the public hearing and ask Mr. Erdman to please present. And welcome. And good job on those bridges.
Thank you. Staff did an exceptional work to make this
Yes.
work. If it pleases the board, I'll give you a little background. On March 14th, 2022, the Public Works Office received a petition signed by 3 landowners adjoining and adjacent to Cottonwood Drive, requesting that a portion of Cottonwood Drive be vacated. The petition was accompanied by a sufficient bond as required by law. On March 29th, 2022, pursuant to Chapter 12.08010 of the Franklin County Code, the board accepted the petition and ordered the county engineer to report thereon. And the county engineer has completed said report and presented it to the board. The purpose of this hearing is to consider the report of the county engineer together with any evidence for or objection against such vacation and abandonment in accordance with RCW 36.87 and Chapter 12.08 of the County Code. Per Chapter 12.08 of the County Code, a unanimous vote of the Board of County Commissioners is required to approve the vacation. The board is not bound by the recommendation of the county engineer. Findings. After review of the petition and operations of the road, it is my opinion that the portion of Cottonwood Drive under consideration is useless to the county road system, and that the Board of County Commissioners approves the vacation of said portion of Cottonwood Drive. It is also recommended that the Board of County Commissioners retain an easement for the construction, repair, and maintenance of public utilities pursuant to RCW 36.87.140. May I answer any questions the board has?
Questions for Mr. Erdman?
I have a couple of questions, but I'll defer to Commissioner Mullen if he wants to go first while
No,
I
go
finish my
first.
notes. No questions?
No question.
Three applicants, they all have properties adjoining to the road. Are there other adjoining residences, not just property ownership? Or do those three comprise all the people that,
I believe those three comprise all of the relevant parties.
okay. Any public comments? I saw one from Mrs. Muse, I think it was.
Yes, Mrs. Muse came, expressed her want for it not to be vacated, stating that she thought it might be a viable access to the riverfront. However, on examining the conditions at the end of Cottonwood Road and the adjoining slopes down to the riverfront area, it is my opinion that the road there's no viable option to build a road there.
Certainly not cost-effective.
Certainly not. I'm not saying it's impossible. I
It
mean,
could be done, but yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think the county would receive the benefit from the cost.
Yeah, okay, so that kind of answers my next question, was likelihood of any future extension of that road sounds like little to none
Little to none.
because of cost and terrain.
Yes, it would be exceptionally
Okay.
expensive. I can bring up
Who does the maintenance on the road now?
county. It is a county gravel road. We maintain it.
Okay. Who built it?
I believe the county did in the packet. I think it was built in 1954? Yes.
I'm sorry, what year?
1954.
54, okay. I'm guessing in that time we've gotten our value back out of the investment.
I'm quite sure.
Yeah, who will maintain it if we vacate it?
The landowners, specifically, I believe the prime member of the petition.
Okay. They're aware that there's a requirement to maintain it to an emergency access standard,
Yes,
and they're willing to do that?
yes.
And is it routinely used by the public for anything you're aware of?
No, it's mostly moves the farm products from those areas.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Chairman, move to approve Resolution 2022-116 in the matter of vacation of a portion of Cottonwood Drive as presented.
Second.
Excuse me, Commissioner Peck, I haven't closed the open public meeting yet. I'd like to close the public hearing for the vacation of a portion of Cottonwood Drive and ask for a motion.
Motion as stated.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the vacation of a portion of Cottonwood Drive, Resolution 2022-116. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, Mr. Erdman.
Thank you.
Elections Department Reorganization, Resolution 2022-117. Eric.
Good morning, Commissioners. I bring before you a request on behalf of County Auditor Matt Beaton to reorganize his Elections Department. This request includes reclassification of the current Elections Administrator position to an Elections Manager, and then the addition of an Assistant Elections Manager position, as well as an additional elections assistant position, which is already an existing position within the pay structure, or the office structure, excuse me. Over the last couple months, we worked together following some turnover in his office to reevaluate and do that compensation analysis and job description work. And then, the culmination of that was in your packet in the read ahead, but happy to answer any questions regarding the compensation. And then obviously the auditor is beside me. He can speak to any of the reasons for his request or whatnot for his office.
All right, thank you very much. So that we have questions, commissioners.
What is the current grade scale of the person in charge of elections?
It's currently a grade 16, which the current salary range for the year is starting at $56,430.40 and ends at $75,774.40.
So with this new position of elections manager, you want to put it in at a grade 19?
That's the auditor's request, is to put it at a grade 19, consistent with other comparable management positions in his office. Based on the compensation analysis that I conducted, I believe a grade 18 would be the most appropriate, but his request is a grade 19.
And Mr. Beaton, what is your reasoning for going for a 19 as opposed to a grade 18?
Sure. It's pretty straightforward that the nearest comparator for us is Yakima, as is evidenced by, the litigious environment that's been created by the bilingual status. There's only 4 counties in the state of Washington that have the bilingual, federally required bilingual. And in working with Auditor Ross up there and what their challenges and what they've run into, theirs, it was basically patterned after theirs. And so it's important to understand in the elections community, the need to get it, obviously the changes since 2020. And so, I guess as we just went through with the redistricting, that's something that they went through up there. And so I'm essentially trying to build or put together an elections department that's prepared for the changes that have even just happened in the last 2 years.
Those changes being?
Well, so, yeah, of course, everyone's aware that, I can tell you, for starters, right now, we're understaffed, and that's based on the added complexity. Even in just the last couple of years, they've added voter pamphlet production. So we now have to create and send a voter's pamphlet, including, at this point, the law is actually hard to comply with, but we've got to send them to the UOCAVA voters, military and overseas voters. As everyone's aware, after 2020, the PRA requests, the public records requests, have gone through the roof. And I actually brought in one example of the increased complexity that they've added through all of the litigation and changes through the elections process. And one of them is, as of this year and for this primary, they've implemented a law for 17-year-old primary voters. And so this adds, that there is 164 potential 17-year-olds that, per the new law, will be able to vote in this primary. The interesting thing on that is, of these 164, and we mailed them all ballots, they're across 70 precincts and 9 ballot styles. And the reason that's relevant is, and it adds complexity to the elections process, is they can only vote on certain things. So for those 164 potential voters, we had to create special ballots because they can only vote on issues on that ballot that follow through to the, to the general election. So winnowing elections is what they call them. And so, between that and we just got another, they call them clearinghouses. But as everyone knows, Franklin County has the Dominion system, and there has been public records requests across the state for all the systems, but they just passed an emergency law to give clarity to the requests being made by the public for the well, I mean, I could just read it to you. They want access to the electronic voting system. Specifically, they want to review internal electronic software, mechanical, logical, and related components. The point is that there's been so much interest in election over these last few years. Franklin County being one of the 4 counties, like I've said to Eric, Franklin County needs to establish an elections department for the next 10 years and not for the last 10. And as these things get more and more complex, out of the 2020 election, they commissioned a statewide auditors. The state auditor did a review of a specific aspect of elections, which had to do with the rejection rate. Franklin County, I think we made it in the Seattle Times on several occasions based on, the information that was, or misunderstanding of some of that information. And so the complexity has gone up incredibly so, and so we're at the point where this has really been elevated to, it always has been, but it's really needs to be prioritized based on the potential for litigation in this area.
So are all the costs of this position, are they 100% solely Franklin County's, or do you get any funding from the state?
Well, so there is funding from the state. Anybody that participates in the election reimburses the county for the cost of it. That's the important thing to remember about elections. We're providing this service. Franklin County is statutorily required to provide this service to all the districts. And so we just did an analysis back through 2016, and the amount of reimbursement varied from, I think, a low of 38 to a high of 85%. It's a complex, it has to do with how many of the districts have positions on that ballot and how those costs are shared, and it's constantly changing. But the cost of elections have gone up exponentially because of the number of things. I mean, again, the 17-year-old, they passed a law to reach those 164 people. And as we've gone, and other things, I mean, you guys obviously understand, you just went through a lawsuit. I think Yakima, I think they have 3 or 4 current lawsuits against them, and they, it's the same thing. There's so much attention and demand on it that it's really, you build the department, for the potential of error, and so and then it scales from there based on, hiring part-time and training people. But the answer is yes. Much of this is passed through to the districts, depending on the participation rate in those elections.
So I see the need for the positions in the elections department. I guess I just wanted justification as far as going from a step 8 or grade 18 to grade 19.
Sure. It's really moved into a much bigger responsibility. It always has been, but the pressure and the attention has created the need to create a department that has a career path and a professional appreciation for it. I would say this, I mean, elections is akin to medical services. I mean, you can, when you're going in for an open heart surgery, you want someone that's been in the field and has experience. And it's very similar in elections as all of these legislative tweaks and changes come. It's just important that you create a system that will attract and reward experience. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's what they had to do up there, and quite frankly, that's the model match that I was able to find, being that we have identical impacts as far as the federal bilingual requirements, which creates a level of complexity that other counties just don't have yet.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Beaton, are all your positions filled in your office in the elections portion?
Not currently.
How many vacancies do you have?
Have one right now.
The voter pamphlet that you referenced, who has created that in the past?
It's either not been created, or it's been created well, we've participated in the creation of it, but it's been created actually by us with the Secretary of State. We do work with the Secretary of State and do the translations, actually. It's one of the ways we generate revenue.
So the voter pamphlet was not always created in the past?
That's correct. Not always required to be mailed for every election, and that includes creating one for districts that do bonds and everything. So that is absolutely a new requirement.
I think we were talking about creating it, not the mailing piece, if we could differentiate. We've been creating one, so far as I know, for the last 15, 20 years. Is there a year in that time that you can recall that we didn't have a voter's pamphlet?
Yes, in the elections I'm discussing, we did not create a pamphlet. If you're talking about could we or have we always created a general or participated in the creation of a general election pamphlet, the answer is yes, we have. But the amount of time involved, and now we have to create it for every election and translate it, for every election and mail it. I don't believe we've ever created one and had to have it prepared in time to send to UOCAVA voters overseas, hard copies.
So then the new work is creating a voter's pamphlet for the primaries that we haven't done in the past? Is that what you're saying?
For every election, correct. Primary as well as, like the most recent Public Facilities District for Pasco, we had to create a voter's pamphlet. In that case, I think we mailed it with the ballot because it was a one issue, but yes.
So if I'm understanding then, we've only done voter's pamphlets in the past for general elections, not for primaries and special elections?
There has been times when those have been produced, but it was never required statutorily.
But we haven't done them here, generally speaking, except by rare exception.
Okay, yeah, I mean, for the time I've been here, we have produced them for, in concert with the state for general elections.
But your office hasn't had the requirement to do voters' pamphlets. Let me rephrase that. Hasn't actually participated in creating voters' pamphlets for anything other than general elections? Is that what you're saying?
I guess what I'm trying to, you're getting very specific, and so.
Well, you're saying that you've got additional workload because you have to do all these additional voters' pamphlets, and I'm simply trying to find out what is past practice and what's the practice going forward, so I can see the difference between the two workloads.
Sure. I think it's safe to say we participated in creating and distributing, I don't even know if we distributed them. That was actually, I think, done by the state. So the fact is, yes, we have had a hand in and have the knowledge to produce these. We're now required to do them for every election.
Okay, so now you're required. In the past, it was optional, but in the past, you actually did it.
I think, yes, it may well have been required for the general, but we did it, correct. It's just more work, much like the public records requests, or even, it just has to do with complexity and the amount of complexity and the general risk that creates in the opportunity for an error. And that's really what's kind of increased, the number of laws and the number of same-day voter registration has come on. I mean, this field is always been, it's just really become the focus nationally. As you can tell, it's just unending news on the 2,000 mules, and it's constant. And so with that and with the increased complexity, if Franklin County, wants to meet its statutory requirements to the people of Franklin County and the districts that it serves, this is the move we need to make.
So I understand that. I understand the attention on Dominion. What I'm still trying to get clarity on, I still don't think that we've necessarily come to a meeting of the minds here on voters' pamphlets. The new statutory requirement requires you to do voters' pamphlets in races that previously were optional. But in those optional races previously, you did participate in producing those voters' pamphlets. So I'm not seeing the change in the workload. I'm seeing a change in the requirement, which I understand. But I'm not seeing a change in the actual work being done because my understanding is that you have participated in the creation of the voters' pamphlets in the past, even when it was optional. So that's what I was trying to get better clarity on. So do I have that right?
Well, I think you're misunderstanding. The key component is we used to produce one, and now we've had 4 elections this year, so we've had to produce 4. So if you're talking about the ability, yes. If you're talking about the repetition, and then based on the number of people we've had, it takes a person with the limited number of people, you know, to go ahead and produce those. And so it's an increased amount of required work overall. But if you're asking, yeah, I mean, that's basically what it is. So it underestimates the amount of time we need, productive time we need to produce that, as well as meet some of these other needs.
Yeah, I wasn't asking about the ability. I was asking specifically about the past practice. And it sounds like you have produced them in the past. Going from 1 election to 4, I grant you, is an increase. Those additional races would be special elections, primaries, anything other than the general. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay. If you produce one for a primary, does that then reduce the amount of work required to subsequently produce the one for the general? Point of the question is it really twice as much work, or are you creating it and then updating it for the general?
Sure. I mean, if we have the opportunity to use, you know, something we've already created, yeah, we
Sure,
do that.
sure.
That makes
So
sense.
it's really not 4 times the work. You're already doing 1, and the other 3 that you're adding really flow into the general. So I appreciate your candor on that. The 164 additional voters out of 40,000, I could use some help in understanding why that's a significant workload increase, 164 voters.
It's not a workload increase. I was trying to demonstrate you know, when you're in a productive, when you're producing something like an election, and the increased, you know, the increased complexity has to do with ballot styles. Everyone's moved, or a lot of people are running to district only. That increases the number of ballot styles you have, which means you're not just producing one ballot, everybody gets it and votes it. You have to get the right ballot to the right person. And as you compound these things, it pushes itself over into, you know, monitoring and assuring that everybody gets the ballot they're supposed to get to. So that's the purpose of pointing that out. I mean, it's a little
Don't
bit
you
like-
monitor and assure that people get the right ballots now?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say, is the complexity. It's a little bit like the Dropbox. When we started here, we were the only county in the state that had postage for return ballots. We removed it, and what happened was we went to the Dropbox situation. In fact, I remember you were one of the lead people on, you know, trying to make sure that the state reimbursed for the Dropboxes. That law requires, we now have, and we'll be installing a Dropbox. We have one, with Mr. Erdman's help. We got one in Colotis. So we're gonna have to pay the cost to maintain something, and there's, you know, just a few hundred voters in that area. And so this is what I'm talking about is as we socially use the elections process to try to reach some of these priorities that are changing over time, this process, it's just gonna become more and more complex and consequently more expensive to operate these.
So, Eric, you did the comp study on salaries. Did you look at office size per capita, being as the statutes apply to all the 39 counties? My line of inquiry is focused on understanding whether or not Mr. Beaton's staffing in the elections department is consistent with other similar-sized counties. You know, it's so often when we're doing these comparators, we get into budgets, we get into whether it's Whitman County that's got a small population or King County. But in this case, sounds like the processes are the same, and whether you're printing 100,000 or 500,000 ballots is more of a printer and a budget issue. So I'm just looking at the staffing piece. What's your opinion of election staffing for our size county?
For a compensation analysis, looking at the staffing levels in an office or their budget size, those things are not something that's factored into the compensation analysis. we'd do a comparison of the job duties and determine, if it's a, kind of a reasonable match, and then use that to conduct the compensation analysis and determine kind of an
Yeah.
average range of the
Wouldn't that
comparators.
be for a given position where you're looking at a salary or grade change?
Correct, and so this reorganization request that Mr. Beaton requested encompasses kind of 3 different variables of a comp review
Right,
process.
and I'm not asking about the grade change, I'm asking about the staffing levels.
Yeah, so that's not something that historically, that we've done in the compensation review process at Franklin County.
So you don't have an opinion on that?
No, I don't.
Okay. Did you happen to take note of how it compares with other counties?
I mean, what I do is like, so say like Benton County, for example, which obviously not quite apples to apples to us, but where their job descriptions are available online, I'm able to see the number of elections, position, job titles, classifications that exist within an office, and I believe they had 4 different elections, which classifications, which is consistent with us. Yakima, which I did look at per Mr. Beaton's request, had was about 6 or 7 different position classifications. Again, that doesn't tell me employee counts, just position classifications, but like I said, that's not, office size is typically not something I look at.
Yeah, okay. One of the challenges I see with this one is the combination of additional positions and grade changes. I personally think these should have been handled separately. I realize it's a reorganization effort, and there's multiple pieces that go into it, but it puts us in a position of having a resolution that is sort of the full meal deal, and I don't support all the things on the list. I might be persuaded to support some of them. So just for future consideration, that might be helpful. I don't know how the other commissioners feel about it.
So when you look at the other counties, is Franklin County, is it different because we have 3 positions in the courthouse and 3 positions in the election center? Or do other counties have them all in one location?
Again, that's not something I necessarily look at from a comp review standpoint. I'm looking at job descriptions and how they align to what our job duties and job descriptions exist here, and determining a percent match, and then coming up with that average salary range based on that. I don't get into the details as far as if there's multiple satellite locations. Certainly if that's a request that's brought before either the elected official or the department head as one of the reasons for the justification of the request, I'm more than happy to include it in the package, or allow them to speak to that because they're in a better position to do so, but it's not something I look at as part of the compensation review process.
I guess it would, scheduling, I would see would be a conflict when you have 3 people in one position, one location, and 3 in another. So that's why I bring it up.
I can speak to it, because this is actually one of the things we need to look to, especially with the anticipated growth. I know even in the past, I think, and I think it's probably going to be time for this commission, or one soon, to start to look at growth, as we have to recognize how much is here. We have a challenge having our office split. And so even having talked with facilities about trying to consolidate the office with chain of custody and being able to handle ballots, and again, a lot of these new things that have been added, and then if you want to add in all of the, FMLA and just all of the benefits that are afforded this, in order to create an environment where, again, people are not run into the ground, in the elections process as it gets more intense and the demands on it. That's why, yes, we do, in order to be able to have people take a lunch or be out sick and still be able to conduct an election, especially if you're in the middle of an 18, when the ballots are out. It becomes very intense, it's very detail-oriented, and that's why you just have to staff these up. And you generally staff for the presidential election when you have a 70-80% turnout. It may look like in off years, but in order to bring someone up to speed, get them certified, there's a requirement in the state of Washington for experience and continuing education and hours. So in order to build, a team that can deliver this over a 4-year cycle, this is the situation we find ourselves in based on the demands and desires of our legislature and the people through their lawsuits and things of those nature. So that's, I would say the next piece for us is going to be to try to find a place to either lease. Many of the counties, some of the bigger ones, have found facilities to lease to consolidate because we have voter registration night in which people need to be able to, just a lot of people will show up on same-day voter registration. That's something that's been added, since in the last 12 years. And this has really been a very interesting to watch, the costs that they add in to try to reach these things. And our responsibility statutory is to meet it. And based on my 12 years in this office and working with absolutely some of the best we've, trained people that have been here from the beginning through all this, I consulted with a number of people on how to get there and be able to deliver this. And this is the most, the most economical way I can find at this point to do it.
Mr. Beaton, are you permitted to use volunteers to pick up some of the work that doesn't require certifications to lighten the load on your staff
People do.
during
they
election
call-
cycles?
Yeah, they do call it volunteering. I think there's rules around, the amount of time and payroll and that kind of stuff. So there's labor issues around volunteers. Eric might be able to speak to the use of volunteers. That has changed over time, but the fact is we do use part-time and temporary staff to meet, as an election, depending on the size of the election.
So you made the comment that you need to staff for an event that happens every 4 years. Is there not an opportunity to supplement in those presidential years? I gather you do some. Isn't there an opportunity to, rather than staff for a once in 4 year event, to staff for the average and then supplement with temporary part-time and volunteers in those presidential years?
That's exactly what we do. So, and this staffing level is based on the way Franklin County has, structured its elections with the 2 locations. We do exactly what you're saying, and the number of staff we have right now is what is needed to meet, the bilingual requirement that we have federally. Like I said, that's where Yakima is just so comparable. And it's really the cost of this. I mean, when you look at it, your one lawsuit, you guys, what did you settle for $300,000 on that district only? The lawsuits that are over, I don't remember the number. The point is that the cost of litigating is much more expensive on the back end than it is to staff up on the front end and do the best we can to be compliant.
So I agree that the cost of complying with the law up front is much cheaper. I'm not convinced that a bilingual requirement justifies an entire increased grade. I mean, Eric was able to find his way from a 16 to an 18, which I frankly have trouble doing myself. And then to suggest, as you did earlier in this conversation, that the bilingual component justifies the 19, I think the bilingual component makes it more difficult. And some departments, and working from memory here, I think the sheriff's office has special compensation for people who bring special skill sets, and it seems to me that that's a more appropriate way to do this than trying to add an additional grade because it's bilingual. I think that's really probably all that I would offer at this point, except that the comparative analysis between a medical procedure and running elections, you did lose me on that one. Thanks.
That particular example has to do with experience. And so I think to build a department for Franklin County and its citizens over the next, decade and what's coming is prudent and a good use of their tax dollars to assure there's since 2020, there is a tremendous amount of concern about elections in America. And this would be a move by this board to make a commitment to do the best we can to comply with this stuff as it continues to come at us full speed.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. When it comes to surgeons, I'm going to pay as much as I can manage to pay and get the best that I can. I'm not going to take a lot of risk in that regard. When it comes to my elections department, I'm probably going to be willing to take a little bit more risk than I would with my surgeon. One of my broader concerns that doesn't apply just to this request, but applies across the board with the county. I think this board has been spending, to steal a metaphor out of the 40s and not to offend anybody, but spending like drunken sailors. And I think recession is coming. This reminds me very much of what we saw in the 2009-2010 cycle. The 2010 process included the board cutting staffing and spending about 10% across the board. With inflation rates that we're seeing, I think we're headed for a similar experience next year. And I think that there's ever a time for us to be cautious and prudent, fiscally speaking, is now. And people get their tax notices. I suspect they're going to agree wholeheartedly. And, we kind of opened the door when we made a grade change a few months ago, and I said at the time, we better expect to see a percentage of our workforce coming in looking for equal treatment. And calculation at that point was that it could easily run up to a couple of $1 million a year in our personnel account. Let's say it's only half of that and we go into recession, we're going to have a significant reduction in force to be able to meet our budget. My opinion, been doing this for a while. Thanks.
So Eric, how many counties have this bilingual?
There's 4.
And what are those counties?
King, Adams, Yakima, and Franklin.
So Adams, Yakima, you did a comparison of those two.
I didn't look at Adams. I looked at Adams, and the salary range was far lower than the current position where it is here. At Mr. Beaton's request, I looked at Yakima as they're in one of our other nearest neighbors with that similar requirement. As I mentioned in my findings memo, I didn't believe it appropriate to just solely look at Yakima from a comparator standpoint because it's not an established comparator for Franklin County, and I didn't believe that fair to the other analysis that I either have come before or that I'm currently working on after, but I did look at it.
So what would be your reasoning as to why Grant is not a bilingual county? I know this is out of your spectrum, but for the likes of me, I can't figure out why Grant is not bilingual.
I would assume it's some type of designation, but I'll defer to
Yeah,
Mr.
I mean, I
Beaton.
can answer that. It has to do with the census and the number of minorities or of any particular classification. So those are federal designations that are.
Okay. And how important do you think elections are, Eric? I mean, as important as a doctor is to a surgery, how important are elections to freedom?
I mean, as far as, just for the record, I state I think any and all county positions are important and do a service to the taxpayers of Franklin County, but, I do believe elections to be important. It's one of when people think of government, that's one of the things they think of, so our elections.
Yeah, which is our liberty, which has been sort of treaded on here as of the recent couple of years with our governor, with his unconstitutional mandates. So I can see the importance of elections. And I think that now more than ever, I think we need to make sure that our elections office is up to speed and credible. Because we're going to be under the eye. We already are. We've had all these public records requests. We've had a lot of more people attended. I'm on the canvassing board, so I'm watching people come in, and they're very interested, and people are asking questions. So I see the importance of our elections and how important they are to the people of this country and to this county. So I, for one, I think that we need to really look at making sure that we are staffed up, and how are we going to attract a manager at this point in time? I'm asking you, how are we going to attract a manager at this point in time?
I mean, we have a variety of recruiting resources. What we've been doing for professional level positions, which I would articulate, I would classify the elections manager as a professional level position. There's several statewide specialty, kind of networking agencies, boards, pooling programs, things like that have job posting components to that, that we certainly do with, are happy to post on. We have it in our recruiting budget. We've done it for other positions. As with any opening, I'm happy to work with Matt on where, if there's any other, things I'm not aware of in professional election circles where that could be appropriate. Obviously, while not probably at the elections manager level, but I think in this labor environment, job fairs or, all those things become even more important because you have to compete for every person, every applicant. It's the weirdest labor market I've ever seen.
I think Mr. Beaton had something to say.
I just want to add, Franklin County has, and this is forward-looking. Like I said, this is Franklin County preparing for what's coming. We have had and been recognized statewide, the very good and some of the best elections in the state. We've avoided many of the local lawsuits and that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to say is this has been a very well-managed process by the former elections manager. And in fact, it was with, their input on looking forward and her experience that helped us, to try to divine how would we do this and what are we going to do? And so it's important to say, and I want to make sure we know that with great confidence, we have conducted these elections and avoided, many of the lawsuits that have captured, some of the people locally. And now as we look at this and try to evaluate it, that's what I'm here today to do, is to lay this groundwork and to also talk about what it might look for the people in elections when we're all out of here. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do, is set ourselves up to do that. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Keith, I believe you had something to say.
I had a question, and it kind of has been talked about or in a roundabout way for Mr. Beaton. You've explained that one of the major reasons for your recommendation to make this a grade 19 over the HR's recommendation of a grade 18 is the bilingual component. Is it true then that the elections manager that you anticipate for this position, that they are personally bilingual, or do they just have to oversee the bilingual nature of elections? Is that a distinction without a difference, or?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, if obviously anytime you can add bilingual to the workforce, that is a plus. The point is that the bilingual requirement adds a level of legal responsibility from a federal level and interest. And if you look at Yakima and look at here, and I do want to note on an hourly basis, this a grade 19 does not reach what they're paying in Yakima. And in fact, they're under review right now, and it will likely go up because of, if you look at all the lawsuits they've had and that we've had here, even your redistricting lawsuit, they're all based on a minority status. So it has to do with the classification and complexity based on that, and having someone that's in there that has experience, and that experience, is critical to create an environment where you draw someone in and do that. So yes, I mean, the bilingual just adds a whole federal level that is nobody else has, and everyone's just praised they don't have. So
My question though is who has that responsibility to be bilingual? I mean, is it, I don't speak Spanish.
Right.
Okay, I'm not suggesting I'm going to be your elections manager, but because I don't, does that disqualify me from being the elections manager?
no, the county has to comply with the language.
As long as I have somebody on the staff that
Right,
can
and
meet that
we have
federal
two.
component.
Well, we have one, and we're trying to cross-train, and so we're looking at having even two that can do the translations, as well as just staff throughout the courthouse that can help each other with the bilingual citizens that come in.
Does the elections manager in Yakima, is that individual bilingual that you know of?
No,
Okay.
no.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions?
No.
So at this point in time, I'd ask for a motion.
I'm not inclined to make a motion. I think that there's a couple of issues. One, I don't think that we can afford the request as presented. Two, I don't think it should have been presented as a package where we can't separate it out. Portions of it might be supportable. Portions of it for me certainly are not. And if there's ever a time for fiscal discretion, it's now. This spending train, in my opinion, is out of control, and we need to pull back on the throttle. So that's where I'm at.
I see the need to make sure that our elections are ran adequately and with integrity and trust. The only question I have is the grade 18 or the 19. I guess I would want to see more justification why it should be a grade 19 as opposed to 18. Are we having trouble hiring people at a grade 18?
So as I just said, the 19 is, I mean, the model I used was Yakima. And in Yakima, they grade differently. They have a D62 or whatever it is. But their hourly wage ranged from $37 to $49 an hour. This grade at a grade 19 would put us, 36 to 48. I'm rounding, but I mean, it would put us $1 less. And I guess the most important thing I would tell you is, at this point in time, Franklin County is out of position. And I think and again, if, in talking with the auditor up there, they're in for a regrade right now. And it's actually, I think it's something we tried to do, which was an outside agency to come in and regrade. So they're looking at increases even from where they're at right now. And it's such a unique trade that if you're going to try to build something and you need to set it at, my other directors, I think my supervisor, I think my two, and it's, within the auditor's office, our our two directors in finance are at 20s. We do have a supervisor in the accounting department that's at a 19. And so that was part of the rationale for this. But the big piece is, for me, as the auditor and the representative of this process, and the fact that this is something that Franklin County statutorily has to produce this service, and that we really need to set this thing up. And I would strongly urge you to support what's in front of you right now so that we can move forward. Right now, we are down one person, and again, this doesn't even get us to where they're at in Yakima. And so, that's where I'm at.
So, Mr. Beaton, I hear you talking a lot about Yakima. Well, let me ask it this way. You know how many people there are in Franklin County as our auditor. You must know, right, about?
Sure.
And what is that?
100,000.
Okay. What's Benton County? Rough idea?
So the important thing, and Eric and I had this same discussion, is it's called an MSA. And the jobs
Yeah,
that
so,
compete here.
so if you don't want to answer the question, that's fine.
Well,
Benton
you're trying to
County's,
walk me up to act like Franklin County stops at the river.
no, Benton County is 200,000.
Sure.
Yakima County is 251,000. I think I see why Eric feels that Yakima is probably not a great comparator for us. But you keep talking about and implying that we're just like Yakima County, and we should do, can do, and can afford what a county 2.5 times our size can do. And I just don't think that's a valid comparison.
Well, and I think it's really important to look at what elections are and how, and my argument is really, unfortunately for Franklin County, the Tri-Cities is one labor market. That's just what it is. And you are competing. Some of our comparators are not other counties. When someone's looking at a job, they're not going, well, am I going to go to Yakima? Am I going to go to Grant? Maybe I'll go over to Whitman. They're going to look within their labor area. And we are either going to value elections as a county, as a professional position that's demanded of it, or, we're not. And so that is really on you guys to decide right now. I, with the strongest emphasis, hope that based on the challenges we have and the length of time that it takes to fill these positions, I'm hopeful we set this at a 19 and get 10 applications from around the state and get somebody with 10 years of experience. That's the best thing for Franklin County and the potential legal liability going forward.
So I'm going to disagree straight up with that statement. You said you're either going to value elections or you're not, implying that this is a binary choice. And it's simply not. You can value elections, but still be a responsible legislative body that doesn't spend like drunken sailors, as I said earlier. So any suggestion that an unwillingness to support what you've walked in and asked for, the whole full meal deal, is somehow an indication that we don't value elections is simply wrong. It's way off the mark. We value elections, we value all of our departments, but that has to be balanced against the precedent we set for other departments. It has to be balanced against budgets. It has to be balanced against the recession that I contend is coming. Taking a note from your point about how important it is to look forward. I just want to be very clear. I think you're absolutely dead wrong in the notion that the only choice is you either value elections or you don't.
Gentlemen, I've put in 12 years. Rocky, directly. I'm telling you, the time I've put in, and we've run these offices, and in fact, the predecessor administrator was absolutely, geared towards efficiency and effective use of taxpayer dollars. There is no fluff in this. With the strongest words possible, I want to tell you, we need to hope that we can attract someone. I actually wanted a 20. You guys have to understand how much elections have changed and how important this is. Because it's penny smart and pound foolish to act like you can just attract someone here like you can to some of these other positions. And then the unique nature of having, there's a great misunderstanding. Even I bump heads with people over their understanding or not having an understanding of how elections work, what the laws are, and this of all the challenges that Franklin County has, of everything you guys should know. Look at the redistricting. You guys did a voice vote without anybody having given something where the public can come back and say, well, what were those lines? There is so many moving parts that the complexity of this takes a special type of a person. And I'm telling you, we have to compensate them fairly to do it. And so I would ask you to make the motion and at least vote on it so that the public will know, where you stand.
So Eric, what sorts of things do you, as a professional human resources person, what sorts of things do applicants for our jobs look at when they're looking at a position at Franklin County, separate and aside from pay, which we've already discussed extensively?
Aside from pay, I think people look at, benefits I think are an important part, including things like leave accruals and whatnot. Other less monetary reasons would include some, whether or not the body of work aligns with someone's, kind of passions in life, their stations in life, their, even as far as close proximity to their house and having less than a 20-minute commute. There's a variety of reasons that people look at positions, but those are probably the biggies.
Sure. In a general sense, across the whole county, do applicants also look at working conditions, environment, leadership in the office, those kinds of issues across the whole county?
Yeah, I think that those would be things that people probably factor into their decision-making, whether to apply to the county or to, other positions within the county, all sorts of things. So.
Right. Okay, thanks.
How much success have you had just lately, trying to hire people?
Oh, it's tough. As I mentioned earlier, it's the weirdest labor market I've ever seen. Even my own office, you've seen a variety of different postings come up because I'm trying to, do a different strategy to try and attract and retain talent. Even as far down as, Mr. Beaton's customer service specialist position, something that a matter of, 3 years ago probably would have received 20 applications overnight. I think he has maybe 6 or 7 right now. It's a tough labor market.
Yeah, I don't feel that we're alone. It seems like every market, our market, it doesn't matter what job you're applying for.
No, I've seen that, McDonald's is doing hiring on the spot and giving you signing bonuses. McDonald's, that's the labor market we're in right now. It's weird.
Unprecedented times.
Do we have those tools available to us, signing bonuses?
Yeah, we've done similar types of things for like management level positions, whether relocation and.
Relocation expenses, signing bonuses, special pay for special skills, bilingual, et cetera.
Yeah, across the county, there's a few different examples.
Do you feel like we've used those as much as can be done for this department?
For the elections department. I mean, we haven't posted any of the elections administrator position yet because.
So when we talk about the difficulty of attracting applicants to this position, we've still got tools in the toolbox we haven't used, separate and aside from raising the pay grade.
That would be correct, yes.
Okay.
Maybe one of those you could offer is the fact that they could get, if they have an insurance plan, or their wife has an insurance plan, they can take their insurance plan here in salary, because we offer that.
Yeah, that's correct. If somebody has qualifying coverage.
Maybe
they
advertise
can
that,
waive
because,
it.
yeah, that was put in place before I was here, and it's something that I fought against, but might as well advertise it if it's happening. I think we have 50-some-odd people now that have a separate insurance plan, and they take our insurance plan in salary, so that's a bump to the salary.
That is part of the compensation option, and everybody should know that that's by group. In our case, electeds do that. Some of the bargaining groups do, some do not, as I recall. So it's not an individual opportunity, it's a group opportunity.
Prestigious opportunity, I should say, yeah.
Yeah, well, as the
Only a few
lowest
get to do it.
compensated elected official in the county, I love saying that because like some folks, I'm not naming names, but I'm not here for the money either. I suspect these gentlemen aren't either. So it isn't about the compensation, it's about being able to attract and retain. And if that made a difference, the ability to take those benefits as taxable income instead of as benefits, then yes, absolutely, we should be letting applicants know that. You bet. We should be using every tool that we have to attract the best people.
It is fair to say, though, that any department in the courthouse right now is struggling to find applicants.
True.
Yes, that is by far accurate.
I would also maintain that not every department has the potential legal jeopardy that elections has at this moment in history.
Boy, I would think that the sheriff and others would differ with you on that. I certainly would.
So with that, is there a motion? Hearing no motion,
Well, let's, hang on. I do have another question. So how much of this cost, this fiscal impact on Franklin County, does that get passed through to the state? Or is that our total obligation?
Again, is really important to understand. These costs, and I can give them to you, we've worked them up based on the cost of election and the reimbursement, not just the state. The school district pays for their elections, which will be a big part of it. They're just redistricted. Every district that has somebody on the ballot pays their participating cost. So, you know, again, the bottom line percentage reimbursed for the cost. In 2016, now this varies, but I mean, and it changes over time. But in 2016, 60% of the cost, because we're establishing a service for everybody, not just Franklin County, 60% of the cost. 2017, 80% of the cost was reimbursed. In 2018, it was 40. In 2019, it was 85. 2020, it was 38. And 2021, it was 63.
And that's reimbursement of election costs, not of salaries and benefits.
No,
and
I'm
such.
sorry. No, that includes the entire cost of the election. Yeah, you've misunderstood.
So,
If you would spend some time actually coming in and doing some of these things, the way you try to, it's the entire cost of the election, which includes labor.
ironic
And
that you would
materials.
reference coming in sometime.
Right. To the elections process, Mr. Pack. That's what I mean is
No, I've been
actually
there.
participating.
In fact, I bought them pizzas, and so I'm there. That's beside the point. Let's
When I'm
stay on
talking
track.
about the billing and understanding how critical this is and how it actually, if there's anybody else in the county where you literally have to have the foresight to set this up, and everybody pays for it. Is it getting more expensive? Sadly, it is.
Here, let me just ask the question
Stop, I'm
directly.
talking.
You know, because I asked the question
Commissioner
once.
Peck, he was speaking. Would you please let him
All right,
finish?
fine, we'll extend the conversation. Go ahead,
Please
Mr.
let him
Beaton.
finish.
No, I was speaking with Mr. Mullen. I'm trying to, it's unbelievable that, based on everything we've been through, the amount of, public records requests, I mean, we, as a county, like I said, 60, 80, 40, 85, there is laws and whacks around how it's reimbursed. But really, this is a process that while it's in Franklin County, it's for the entire county. And it's getting more and more complex. And that's why I say, this is a looking to the next 10 years, not the last 10 years. And so we need, it would be prudent for Franklin County to see the need, especially having just come off of the amount of time and money spent. I mean, what are we talking about, whether it's, I'm not sure what's holding you up, whether it's I don't even know what the difference between an 18 and a 19 is, but no matter what, we need to change this structure and do what other, bilingual counties have done. I mean, right now, there is 3, I think last time I last spoke to Auditor Ross, they have 3 lawsuits pending in Yakima. And I think even in their case, the importance of a person that's of recognized as a director status is involved and will be involved in that litigation. And so, it's just time to make that move from what was an elections administrator to, an elections director.
So, Mr. Beaton, did you really mean to say that 60 to 80% of these personnel cost increases would be reimbursed by the state?
No.
Or did you mean to more articulate the fact that when they're actually doing an election and there's actual tangible election costs, that those are the ones that get reimbursed, not 60 to 80% of these salaries?
No, it's 38. The most important thing is.
So,
is that
Mr. Beaton, if you could just finish the answer to that, because I'm still not clear.
What's the question, sir?
The question is, what percentage of these personnel cost increases that you're asking for will consistently, year in, year out, the whole year, not just during an election, what percentage of them gets reimbursed by the state? And I know that it varies from year to year, but it's only the expenses that are directly related to election costs. Could you articulate exactly what costs get reimbursed by the state?
Sure. I think the important thing to understand is the state is not the only one that reimburses the county.
I understand.
Pasco and
Other districts.
But as you are precise on your word use,
Yeah,
it
you're
is
correct.
important to
Thank you.
know that if you would like just the state's portion, I will need to, dig deeper into that. This misses the forest for the trees. If you try to get down and talk about, if you get down into the weeds that far.
Mr. Beaton, if
It
you
is.
would, please get into the weeds that far, because you implied to this board that the vast majority of these costs will be reimbursed by others. And if that's the case, I'd like to hear the facts for that.
I just told you the facts are, based on these, the election cost is reimbursed by by the districts.
Election costs, but not labor costs.
No, labor during the election, yes. Again, if you want some of the numbers, it was total, let's see, it had in here,
During the election, not year-round cost.
you know what's funny? So the 2016 election, grand total of expenditures, $437,000. In that year, we were reimbursed $222,000. We're missing the forest for the trees if you boil down elections. And in this last, like I said, really since 2020, and the amount of, I'm just saying, and it's going in that direction, that we need to be able to recognize the demands being placed on this process and to create a professional status manager that transcends me, quite frankly. You want someone who's been there. You don't want I mean, in some places, the auditor, they're small enough, the auditor is everything in the office. That's not Franklin County, and that's not the direction Franklin County is going. And so, I'm not sure if it's either an investment in this structure or it's not. And then, like I said, the next step is to find an election center where we can aggregate everybody. So, yes, I mean, if you're looking at, these percentages are the cost of the election, to conduct an election. And that's what we're trying to do, is hire a leader to conduct an election. And the rest of it's the maintenance of the variable parts, when people move and register and all that, and then the training involved with it, managing the, the drop box locations, all of it.
Eric, what is the difference between a grade 18 and grade 19?
And the steps.
So each of our pay grades include 7 steps. So there's a 10% compression rate between the salary grades. So a grade 19 salary range is starts at $75,150 and ends at $100,880. A grade 18 is $68,307 to $91,707.
And we'd be starting at a 19-1 if this was to pass?
Correct. The county policy is that a person that goes into the position at a step 1, if they're a new hire, certainly if there was another internal candidate, they would go to the step that afforded them an increase per county policy. Any exception to either of those scenarios would have to come before the board.
And what was our last manager making? I don't think she was called a manager, election supervisor, correct? Administrator. What was she making?
It was a grade 16, step 7. I believe at the tail end of that was around 66,000.
So we're only talking $10,000 to try to attract a manager.
Yeah,
An
if you're-
additional $10,000 to attract a manager. Do you think that's going to be an amount that somebody is going to want to come here and face these the moving target that the state's throwing at us every minute?
I think it's tough. I said I have a hard time recruiting in my own office. We do it in the clerk's office. The prosecuting attorneys can't find attorneys. It's just.
I think that's why we're seeing the movement of people throughout the county courthouses, because it's hard to find people.
There is a shortage in the labor force, that's clear. Even United Airlines has trouble finding pilots.
Well, I don't like the idea of expanding government and the costs involved to the county, but I do feel that it is in the county's best interest that we seek the most qualified person that we can to run our elections department in the direction that it is going. I will make the motion. Let's see, get the number here. To approve resolution 2022-117.
I second. There's been a motion and a second for resolution 2022-117 is discussion.
When we increased a grade in an administrative position in the Commissioner's office, and to be clear, I'm not going to go backward into the merits of that decision. I'm just going to point out the timeline. When we did that, I pointed out that this was going to create an expectation among all the departments of elevating their positions, whether they had employee shortages or not, whether the staffing was adequate or not. It's, I think, a human nature to think that if my title is similar, that my compensation should be. I'm of the opinion that the responsibilities don't always follow the title of the position as much as they do the needs in the office. And while I fully recognize that the elections function is an important function, I think that we have got to start being, in my view, more responsible about how we're spending the taxpayers' money I'll leave the politics out of it. I was just going to make a reference to conservative ideology, but I have seen enormous, I think, increases in spending by this board in the time I've been here. Mr. Beaton cited his 14 years. I've been here about the same length, a little longer, actually. I'm very much concerned about the fact that we're spending more. Nobody seems to be talking about reducing taxes. Nobody seems to be rolling back government. It's spend. And we opened that door with the administrative position I referred to earlier. I don't blame Mr. Beaton for coming in and trying to get his slice of the pie, and there are other departments lined up behind him to do the same. And the further we go down this track, the harder it's going to be to rein this in. I'm more in favor of specialty pay, relocation benefits, signing bonuses, those kinds of things to attract and retain people in this labor market. I will not be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Well, you keep bringing up that increase in pay for somebody in the commissioner's office when you sat within Cook's office and talked about
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Accreditation, and
Mr.
the
Chairman,
fact
point of
that-
order.
Point of order, Commissioner Peck.
It is out of order and inappropriate to disparage former Commissioner Cook with allegations of lawless conduct when he himself has publicly stated that your statement about that is patently false. So the point of order is, it is inappropriate, unethical, and out of order for the chair to accuse Mr. Cook of unlawful conduct.
Point of order not taken, because I
You
talked
don't
to
have a choice on
Commissioner-
this one.
Yes, I do, because I talked to Commissioner Cook that morning, and he said that he had met with you and said that you both agreed to give the bonus, the increase in pay.
Keep going.
If she got accredited.
Keep going. Show your colors.
Commissioner Peck, I have the floor. So with that, with the inflation at 11% now, I think we're going to have a hard time finding somebody for 75,000. I don't think we're going to get anybody. So with that, I think that we need to make this as enticement as possible, because elections is of the utmost importance in this country and our county. So with that, there's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I agree with actually both sides of me today. But I think what we're facing is, if we don't correct our problem and look to the future right now and try to prepare for what's coming, we're gonna find ourselves in trouble. I mean, Franklin County is the first majority county in the state of Washington. We have to have fair elections, and we have to have the proper people there to staff them. And although I don't like spending the taxpayers' money, but I think that it's in the county's best interest that we prepare for the future growth.
So I'll just offer that when you've got a job in front of you and you've got a box full of tools, do you use the tools you have first to see if you can fix that roof, or do you run down and buy more tools? Use the tools you have first. If that doesn't work, then you can look at maybe buying bigger, better, more modern, more expensive tools. And that's essentially what I think we're doing here, is we're just throwing grade changes and money at the problem without trying any of the other tools we have. I know for a fact that relocation bonuses, signing bonuses, other tools that we have not used can be effective. Doesn't mean they are, but I think a prudent fiscal conservative would use the tools they have before they go buying new ones. With the taxpayers' money.
Any further discussion?
I'm just gonna reiterate the problem that we have right now, and it seems like we can't get anybody hired for any departments.
Well, I would suggest that we're underpaying everybody, or that there's some other issue at play here. I personally think it's some other issue, and I think we ought to be using the tools we have, and if that doesn't work, then we can revisit this 60 days from now.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we have a motion and a second for Resolution 2022-117. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay?
Okay. Motion passes. We'll move down to Chief Deputy Assessor position reclassification. Eric,
I'm just gonna make myself comfortable here, so.
you do that.
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt for just a moment?
Absolutely.
I think there's a typo in the agenda. Shouldn't that be the chief deputy clerk position?
Oh,
as opposed to
you're exactly
assessor?
right. That is not assessor, that is clerk.
The language in the ASR in the resolution is correct.
Yes.
It's just the language on the
Chief
agenda.
Deputy Clerk position reclassification. Thank you for that. Resolution 2022-118. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, so this request on behalf of the county clerk is to reclassify his chief deputy clerk position from a grade 18 to a grade 19. As the board will likely recall, in late March, when the assessor brought before the board a request to reclassify his chief deputy assessor position, at the time, there was discussion around the pay grades of the various chief deputies and where they lied on our existing salary schedule structure. And so, and the direction from the board at that time was that if any of the elected officials that had their chief deputy positions below grade 19, that level, to let me know when I bring the request. And so that's what I'm doing today on behalf of Mr. Killian. Happy to answer any questions from the read ahead or anything that you may have.
Questions, commissioners? Hearing no,
So you're gonna bring forward all the requests for all the chief deputies? is
So
that correct?
following the approval of the chief deputy assessor from a grade 18 to a grade 19, there's only two chief deputy clerk positions in the county that are below grade 19, and that is the chief deputy clerk at a grade 18 and the chief deputy coroner at a grade 17.
So what are your thoughts on all the clerks making the same?
So when I conducted my analysis as a, the chief deputy salaries, typically across the comparators, regardless of whether they were in line with our grade 19 or not, they typically were uniform in nature. So at least for like, your like treasurer's office, auditor's office, clerk's office, coroner's office, the chief deputies, typically their salary schedules are the same across the office and are a flat amount. In those comparator entities, they most of them use some kind of a scheme where it's say 80% of the salary of the elected official, but there was uniformity across the salaries of those chief deputy positions. With regard to this request, certainly it's the clerk's desire to have his chief deputy clerk make the same as the bulk of the chief deputy positions in Franklin County.
so I know these grade levels overlap. Right now, the chief deputy for the clerk at 18, what step are they at? Are they at
Step
step 7?
7.
They are at a step 7 right now?
Correct.
And when was she moved to that step 7? How long?
I believe she's been stepped out for a period of time. I think when we implemented the comp study, she may have gone back a step when the salary kind of grades and stuff shifted around, but has since been stepped out again.
So Eric, when you're comparing grades for positions, I take it you're not looking at what step the incumbent is in. You're looking at the duties and responsibilities for the position. That's what determines the grade. The steps are a function of experience and years in the position. Am I right about that?
Correct. I look at the salary range, and so when I look at an average salary range, I find the pay grade within the Franklin County salary schedule structure that best aligns with what that average is.
Right. So we're comparing grade and salary for the work and the job description. We're not looking at what grade and step are they in now, how much are they making, and how much additional cost is it going to be to the county? Because really the question is appropriate pay for the grade and the position, not for what the actual increase is to the county, although the latter is certainly important to me. You don't change a grade on a position because the incumbent's a step 7 and within $1,000 a year of the next grade. That's what the steps are for, and that's why they step out. That's why we don't go to a step 100, because it's not a never-ending. There's a cap to where the duties and responsibilities of that position financially top out. So I get the sense that sometimes people don't make that distinction. Second thing, I'm not sure I've fully caught all your answer on whether or not you think all of the deputy positions ought to be at the same compensation level.
Yes, so that was the opinion I shared back in March when the assessor brought before his request that my belief is that they should, as there tends to be a uniform treatment or with regard to salary for those respective elective positions, that the chief deputies, in this environment should likely be treated the same.
So I just heard you say that they should be the same because the salaries are treated that way. I didn't hear you make any reference to the responsibilities being identical or highly comparable. I think what they're currently being compensated, I frankly don't see how that's relevant. So what is it that makes you think that they should all be paid the same? And if a department head or an elected doesn't come in and ask for, say, a request to a 19, is it possible that that's reflecting that elected official's opinion, and clearly they're closer to it than we are, as to what that position ought to be graded at?
Yeah, so again, I bring this request on behalf of the clerk as a result of the discussion that was had at that meeting at the end of March. My belief for why they should be all treated the same and equal is this environment. It puts, quite frankly, me as the HR director in a position to weigh the statutory obligations of the auditor compared to the treasurer, compared to the clerk, compared to the coroner, and when you get to that high level, especially the elected official level, everybody's competing with each other, and there's similar competing interests, and quite frankly, it puts me in the position to have to weigh each of those. And given my own comp analysis, each of our comparator entities tend to treat the chief deputies at the same salary range regardless of what office they're serving in. So my assumption would be that those comparator entities probably face a similar dynamic.
So you've been doing HR for a long time, right? How many years?
I've been with Franklin County 6.5 and an additional 3 years before that.
So you've got a decade's experience in HR. Is it your opinion that positions should be graded and compensated based on the work, or a dynamic that just makes everybody with the same title the same across the county?
Typically, I believe that it should be based on the job duties being performed, which is how these positions, so prior to the compensation study, they were all at the same pay grade, and post-comp study, they were put at varying pay grades based on the duties.
Based on the duties?
Correct.
Okay, so they've been based on the duties, but I'm really trying to understand here. They've been based on the duties, but you're saying you think they ought to all be the same grade and pay, even though you, I think, see that the duties are different among them. Do I have that right?
So prior to the comp study, they were all treated identically, regardless of the office.
Right.
They were split out and changed as a result of the comp study.
Got that.
I believe that was, quite frankly, just a mistake. They should have been kept the same. I think when you get to that high level, and I know you and I have a difference of opinion with regard to them being a political appointee or not, but I believe at that chief deputy level, treating them the same, because again, if you make a choice not to do that, then it requires myself as HR director or you as commissioners to put a different set of values on a different office and the statutory functions within that office. And
Sure.
so,
No, I'm following with you. I see the logic in what you're saying. I would point out that sometimes a chief deputy might be in a large office supervising 8 or 10 people. In another office, they might be supervising one person. Do you think that those are equal in terms of responsibility?
I mean, in terms of how you weigh duties, supervision is supervision. So, certainly.
Irrespective of the number of people being supervised?
Where that would come into account from a compensation standpoint would be if you're having to supervise varying duties. So, one person supervising 10 employees performing the same body of the work from a compensation standpoint would be the same as one person supervising one person with, but where you would
That's
have.
assuming the same body of work, though.
Correct. I'm just making a standpoint. So where you would have, if you were supervising 10 people with 10 different complexities, then yeah, you could either pay that person more, or you could hire additional mid-level supervisory lead management positions
Right.
to
And
assist with that work.
there's a lot of things we could do. What I'm getting to is it your opinion that all of our chief deputies' workload and responsibilities are co-equal? No matter how you want to measure it, you can measure it any way you want. I'm just looking for your opinion that the level of responsibilities and the workload are pretty consistent across all the chief deputies.
I mean, each office has varying statutory functions, but with regard to, I would say, yeah, for the most part, they're relatively consistent.
Okay. In terms of breadth, which is the amount of things that they're overseeing, or scope, scope, and the nature of the duties, supervisory and managerial predominantly, as opposed to task-based execution.
Yeah, when you're looking at, I mean, the 5 main elected positions with chief deputy, aside from the sheriff's office command, aside from the chief, the chiefs up in the PA's office, when you're talking the core treasurer, the auditor's office doesn't have a chief deputy, but treasurer, coroner, clerk, and assessor, why, yes, they're, the duties vary by position for the most part, with the exception of the chief deputy coroner who is supervising a temporary on-call person. Everyone is supervising employees that have kind of multiple facets within each of the respective divisions of their office. However, on the side of the chief deputy coroner, I'd argue they're a small, slim operation, and that person's could be responsible essentially 24 hours a day, whereas most of the other chief deputy positions aren't, so.
Is that an on-call position?
The
Chief Deputy Coroner?
No, they have an additional employee in there that is a temporary on-call. or it's
So
not
their
temporary, but on-call
24-hour duty is pretty much like other chief deputies. So anyway, they're not actually on call. All right, well, I appreciate the discussion. It gives me a better sense of where you're at. I agree with most of it, not all of it. I do think there are cases where it differentiates. I'd like to ask you specifically about the chief deputy position that we're talking about here in the clerk's office. In terms of the workload, the breadth and scope of responsibilities, where would you put that position alongside all the other departments in terms of workload and responsibilities? Is it kind of in the middle? Does it tend to be on the lighter end, the heavier end?
I mean, with regard to the clerk's office, I mean, this is the,
Well, I'm asking with regard to all the other departments in the county that have chief deputies.
yeah, so I mean, at that, 19 level, so say that elections manager that was just approved.
I'm asking about the workload, not the grade.
Okay.
Is the workload of that position, you think, very, very close to all the other departments? Does it tend to be in the middle? Is it one of the busier ones, one of the less
I mean,
busy ones?
Based on what I know of the position, I would say yes, it's probably comparable to other positions at that level.
Comparable to all of them? Or is it just in the middle, or what?
I mean, I don't supervise or work in every single office, so I'm hesitant to.
No, but you make recommendations
Right.
about these positions and what the grades and pay ought to be, so
Yeah.
you should have a sense
And
of
my
this.
recommendation is consistent on other chief deputy positions, and so that's where I made a
Okay.
recommendation.
So the work here is comparable to the chief deputy in the auditor's office, in your opinion?
Well, there is no chief deputy auditor, but certainly the treasurer, yes, or the assessor, yes, like they're, in the absence of the elected official or at their direction, they're acting on their behalf, they're supervising a large body of staff.
Okay.
In the clerk's office, they're overseeing work.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So Eric, what's the chief deputy and the treasurer's office making, or what grade are they at?
They're grade 19.
They are grade 19, okay. When I first came here, and you were an assistant to the HR department, I was told that we were losing an alarming amount of people to Benton County because we weren't paying them enough.
Yeah, prior to when you came into office would have been before the implementation of the comp study, that would be accurate, yes.
Yes, and so you're hearing a lot of, resistance to this, and I'm just curious as to what do you think the likelihood of these people staying if we don't compensate them in this inflationary time in our history here in America with the inflation of 11%? things are costing more. And if we don't compensate these people, do you think they're going to look for work elsewhere?
I mean, while I don't think compensation is the only reason why people leave employment, it's definitely a motivator, especially in a high inflation environment. If that's the number one motivator for an individual, yeah, they'll probably look other positions elsewhere. You know, like I said, you know, with regard to this particular position, you know, I think we're competitive.
Okay. Any other?
Hey, Eric, and with respect to inflation, what's a professional HR approach to compensating for inflation? Is it changing people's grades in their positions or cost of living allowance adjustments?
Typically, the latter would be done to keep pace with inflation.
Right. Okay. Yeah, just an observation here. As much as I think we need to be constraining spending in this county, we're doing fiscally reasonably healthy well now because we've got a lot of growth. I do contend and will predict that recession is coming, and we need to be preparing for that, not when it happens, but now. But perhaps as important or more important even than all of that is that our employees feel like they're treated fairly and equitably. And if I have a choice between making a mistake of spending additional money that I really don't want to spend against the other choice, in this case, of treating two similarly situated employees differently simply because of the timing of their application, I'll choose the former, which is to say I would support a grade increase to give equity and fair treatment and equal treatment to all of our people similarly situated. That's a very high priority. So I'm inclined to support this over my own objections about spending, but it's for that specific reason, is that we cannot get into this mode of treating people differently simply because of for whom they might work or when they might have applied. So thanks.
So, Eric, I just went to the last page here, and I noticed that we're going from an 18.7 to a 19.7. Can you answer that? Why are we jumping a whole grade and step level instead of an increment in 19?
So county policy requires that if an employee is moving up a pay grade, they'll go to this, the step that affords them an increase unless there's been no substantive change to job duties. In this situation, there is no substantive change to job duties, as was the case with the chief deputy assessor when that was approved, that the occupant in that position at the time moved to the same step where they were at in their old pay grade into the new pay grade.
Okay. Any further discussion? So hearing none, is there, that hasn't been talked about yet. Is there a motion? Hearing no motion, the resolution fails because of no motion. Let's move down to Commissionery Visitation Clerk position reclassification.
Yes, so I bring this one on behalf of the sheriff. So his commissary visitation clerk position is currently graded at a grade 9. The starting pay rate for that is $14.58 an hour, which is just pennies above currently where minimum wage is. In fact, that pay grade doesn't have, you know, step 1 because that would fall below minimum wage. It's a position that, since it's been open in February, we've received 0 applications for. It's a position, because it's in the sheriff's office, requires a more intense vetting process, I would say, and backgrounding process than any other county positions. And you know, so the request today is to bump it up to a pay grade that essentially brings it above the starting salary of somebody who wants to go work at Taco Bell or, you know, a general fast food place. So given, you know, kind of the part-time nature of the position, more in line with not necessarily internal comparators, but the labor market specifically for those types of applicants.
Okay, questions, commissioners?
I think it's a very reasonable request. I support it. That's about all I have to say.
So I need to make a couple comments.
Oh, help yourself, Sheriff.
So these positions are part-time, as he said. The problem is they're part-time, number one. And number two, when you can't attract part-timers to come in and do that based on what they have to go through in order to hold those positions, then it's a problem. So currently what happens now with our vacancies is we are paying corrections deputies to do that work, replace them in there, and it's at a much higher wage. And when we don't have enough corrections deputies available, then we pay overtime to the corrections deputy to come in and work these jobs. There are people out there that would probably work these part-time jobs, but I'm not even sure if this just jump's gonna work, but we'll see. But it's something we're gonna have to address, either that or convert to FTE positions, corrections deputy FTE positions, which will be much more expensive. So there's where I'm at.
So hearing no more discussion, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve Resolution 2022-119 as
Second.
presented.
There's been a motion and a second to pass Resolution 2022-119. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay, with that, it takes us down to administration office business.
I don't have anything for the board to take action on today, but would request an executive session when it's appropriate. And maybe request a 5-minute recess prior to the executive session.
And I noticed we don't have a second comment period today. Is there a reason why? So before we take the recess, is there any public comment? Nobody on the phone, Keith?
No, sir.
And no public comment. So with that, we'll take a 5-minute recess, and then Keith, you'll lead us into executive session. Do you want to announce it before we go to recess for 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'm going to request an executive session for up to 15 minutes under RCW 42.30.110, paragraph 1, subparagraph I, to discuss with legal counsel litigation or potential litigation. Would ask that members of the board, myself, the clerk, the HR director, and the sheriff be allowed to participate, and the attorneys from the prosecuting attorney's office.
say it will heal.
We're back from the 5-minute recess. It is 10:57. Reconvene the meeting. So Keith, would you please take us into executive session?
Okay. Yes, we're going to request a 15-minute executive session under RCW 42.30.110, paragraph 1, subparagraph I, to discuss with legal counsel litigation or potential litigation with members of the board, the clerk and the administrator, the prosecuting attorney's office, the sheriff, and the HR director.
Okay, we've come out of executive session. We're back to regular session. Is there any other business for the good of the county? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.